Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I finally understood why Donald Trump won the election, and this has far implication to many, many places in across the world. And I think it's important for us to understand this. So let's watch on, shall we? So I finally understood why Donald Trump has won, and more importantly, I know who the culprit is, and it's very important for us to understand the financial market implications behind all these things. Let's watch on. The main reason why Donald Trump has won is not largely because he is good. I suppose there are many people who argue that Donald Trump is good in this area, the area, whatsoever. But in the meantime, we may not realize this, but there are many, many incumbent governments in the world, incumbent political parties in the world have lost their election. So my take is that he's in the right place at the right time. So his timing is impeccable. So who is at fault? Actually, the person at fault is not Harris, it's not the Democrat Party or whatever. The real culprit behind why so many parties have lost their elections across the world is because of this person, okay? And his name is Jerome Powell. He is the culprit behind why many incumbent governments have lost their elections. So let's watch on, and then I'll explain to you why there's an economic implications behind all this. According to the press, there is actually now a graveyard of incumbents in 2024. Graveyard of incumbents. Many incumbent political parties have lost their election, and now they even use the word graveyard. So many incumbent governments are struggling, okay, in election this year, including the US. And in almost in entirety, most of them have lost vote share in a very significant way. So this Financial Times actually wrote this, okay? Every governing party facing election in developed country this year lost vote share. First time this has ever happened. First time. Every governing party has lost vote share. So that's quite a serious matter. And why is it so? Why did this happen? Well, it's simply one word: inflation, right? Inflation, inflation, inflation. So many of the voters are very troubled by the rising cost of living, which is inflation, and they're all very unhappy about it. And even I'm unhappy about the rising cost. But who can they blame? They can only direct their blame at people who is managing the country, which is the government. So when there's an election, they outright direct their frustration at the government. So Financial Times wrote this: voters do not like high prices, so they punish the Democrats for being in charge when inflation hit. Okay, and this is also the top issue in Britain's general election in July. Okay, and in front mind of dozens of other countries for the most of the last 2 years. This is a poll of the top concerns of people, and right on top, okay, is inflation. Now, crime and violence ranks second, poverty ranks third, and so on. But inflation now ranked the highest. And who do they blame? Of course, they blame the government, rightfully or wrongfully. So, which other governments have fared poorly in 2024? Let's watch this. So, in South Korea, okay, South Korea, people were upset over rising prices. And of course, there are other issues as well, corruption scandal and all these things. So, South Korean President Yong has promised changes, and after the opposition party roped to victory in Wednesday's election for the National Assembly, and Yoon suffered poor approval ratings for months because of a failure to deliver on this policy agenda, and voters upset over rising prices. And of course, there's a series of corruption scandals and all this, right? So South Korea is hit heavily by inflation. Inflation is not the only cause, but is one of the heavy costs. So India, right? India ruling party, BJP, is the first time since 2014 they did not secure a majority and need to form a coalition government. So a humble Prime Minister Modi is set to win a rare third term in office, but a smaller than expected mandate, which means he has to now lean on allies for support, blah, 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 blah. The issues that he faces is unemployment, inflation, and economic disparity, blah, 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 blah. So India is being hit also heavily by inflation. In South Africa, ANC party that freed South Africa from apartheid lost his 30-year majority in a landmark election. This is a party that freed South Africa from colonial rule, no? So it's very, very serious. And guess what? Okay, what's the issue, right? Citing cost of living crisis, frequent power cuts, and blah 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 blah. Again, inflation, inflation, inflation. So in UK, the incumbent also lost after being in power for 14 years. Right? People are very upset with the cost of living. I was there during their election. Okay, I was in UK. I interviewed many people. Everybody was very upset about inflation, and they vote the government could see, that kind of thing, right? So it's again, right, cost of living, inflation, unreliable train services, and there's a lot of migrants across the English Channel. The pickpockets now there is terrible, blah blah blah. But key thing is inflation is one of big costs. In EU, same thing has happened. In Europe, okay, for example, in France, President Macron has also lost the popular vote. Okay, this Marine Le Pen, okay, has actually won with a 31.5% best result ever in the national vote. And again, what's the issue? Okay, rising cost of living was a key factor driving people to the polls in June European Parliament election, with 42% of voters citing it as an important issue. In Japan, the long-time ruling party has lost its parliamentary majority. So Japan plunged into political uncertainty after voters deliver a dramatic defeat to long-time ruling party. So Japan's LDP party, which has ruled almost continuously since 1955, has lost its parliamentary majority in a powerful lower house for the first time in 15 years. Again, there was public anger, distrust in the government. It's growing over rising living costs, inflation. And of course, then there are political scandals and all this. Again, inflation, 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 right? And it caused many of the ruling party to fall. So the main thing I want to drive at is that there's a lot of incumbent governments that are losing elections due to inflation. Now, clearly, in almost all the cases, inflation is not the only cause, but is the main cause or one of the root cause. And that explains why President Donald Trump has won, or rather, President-elect Donald Trump has won, and why Harris has lost. Because Harris is seen as the incumbent, right? People are angry, right? They can't let it out at President Joe Biden. They let it out at Harris, right? I couldn't see it then. I could see it now as very, very clear, right? So clearly, right, inflation is giving a tight slap to many, many incumbent governments. But you know what? They are not even the cause of it. There's not even the cause of this whole inflation problem. But who is? So this guy is, right? Prices have risen to astronomical level, okay? Is because the Federal Reserve have been printing money at an unprecedented level. They printed money so much during the pandemic, okay, to help to stimulate the world economy, and they did not pull back fast enough when the whole economy has recovered. As a result, the whole world, suffered a terrible inflationary pressure. And he's the cause of it, right? He's the cause of it. Of course, some other central banks also did the same thing, but I think they all took the cue from him. So in a sense, a lot of the incumbent governments are suffering because this guy exported inflation across the world, and yet the many incumbent governments are taking the blame for it. Very unfair, right? Very unfair. It's truly unfair, but the world is unfair, right? So of course, one could argue that, but yes, he's the cause of it, but my government didn't do enough, right? This one kind of difficult to argue, who's right, who's wrong. But clearly, this phenomena was why Vice President Harris lost the election and Donald Trump won it, right? So he's in that sense, he's probably lucky, or he's an opportunist, that made use of all this phenomena to his advantage. So inflation is a very big problem. But in a current world where everybody is going into trade, it's very difficult to control quite a large part of it. Probably the only country that has controlled inflation is China, but it's because they have a very severe economic weakness right now, and they actually have the reverse, which is the deflationary problem, which is actually far worse. But almost for the rest of the world, we're all suffering from very high inflation. So it becomes paramount for governments to control inflation, okay? And inflation will have very heavy political costs. Even if you are incumbent government, that you are not the cause of all this, because Jerome Powell is the cause of all this, the blame will still come to you, okay? And I'll just say this, okay? Inflation of many items cannot be controlled. okay, because they're international in nature. So a lot of the food, a lot of the goods and services that we imported whatsoever, this thing, the inflation of this, we can't be controlled because it's an open economy. But there are things that can be controlled. Fuel, housing, cars, utility bills, and all this can be controlled, and we must control them, okay? For example, Malaysia government right now wants to cut the fuel subsidy. And I think it's a very dangerous thing to the incumbent government, because when you do that, the prices escalate quite a lot. The political cost of inflation is just too high. So it's a no-win situation. You don't cut the subsidy, the government has a lot of deficit, but if you cut it, you have a heavy political cost. I think it's a very difficult decision, but right now the political cost to do that is very high, right? So I think all incumbent governments have to start thinking of this, that how do we control inflation so that the political cost is minimized. So for those people who actually bet wrongly that Donald Trump would lose, like me, now on the high side, we have a better picture. Of course, hindsight is perfect sight. But fortunately, the stock market is still rising. Okay. And we have to watch the inflationary landscape as well. Donald Trump has not even come on board. And yesterday, there was a small spike in inflation. And that has driven some activities in the bond market negatively. But let's watch on, shall we? So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in a day or two. Bye-bye.